Good evening. Welcome to the Spring 2024 Green Living Seminar at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts in North Adams, Massachusetts. This is an annual lecture series at MCLA each January through April. The lectures are sponsored by the Environmental Studies Department and generous donors to MCLA. We thank you for your past and ongoing support. This year's lecture series is entitled Greening New England. Each week's lecture will highlight the organization's achievements and ongoing efforts that are making New England more sustainable. Tonight we will learn about the work of the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation program that is designed to reduce household heating and cooling energy use by increasing tree canopy cover in urban residential areas. Our presenters are Samantha Eanes and Sarah Greenleaf. Both Samantha and Sarah are urban foresters with the Massachusetts DCR, specifically in the program they will present about tonight, the Urban and Community Forestry Greening the Gateway Cities program. Both Sarah and Samantha have a wide variety of experiences working with different tree species in a variety of settings, in urban settings including New York City, Oregon, California, Detroit, and now across Western Massachusetts, all while they're helping to make New England more green. Please help me welcome Samantha and Sarah to MCLA.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Dan. I'm Sarah, this is Sam. Thanks so much for having us today. It's nice to be here, part of this Green Living Seminar. So Sam and I, as Dan said, we work for the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And we're here tonight just to provide a little bit of the state perspective. And specifically, we're going to talk about the tree planting initiative we work for. And in the context, we're going to talk about how all that helps to advance sustainability in urban residential neighborhoods of Massachusetts. All right, I guess we already had our intros done, but so I am an urban forester, work for the Greening the Gateway Cities tree planting program, and that's a program within the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And specifically, I manage tree planting operations in Western Mass in Chicopee, Westfield, and Holyoke.
And again, my name is Samantha Eanes. I'm a regional urban forester with the Greening the Gateway Cities program. And my main job responsibilities are to oversee the contracted and grant-funded tree planting initiatives, specifically in Western Massachusetts.
Great. All right, I'm just going to look at up here. All right, so here's just a quick little overview of what we're talking about today. I'm going to start off by talking about our tree planting program. Then we're going to look at a case study that basically is the foundation for our program and why it exists. We'll go into a little bit about the research partnerships that we have. Then I'm going to turn it over to Sam, and she's going to talk about kind of the context of our program when it comes to urban forestry, sustainability, resiliency, and of course, climate change. All right, so as we said, we work for the Greening the Gateway Cities program. I often refer to it as GGC or GGCP, just a little quicker. And as Dan said so aptly, we are an environmental and energy efficiency program designed to reduce household energy use by increasing tree canopy cover in urban residential areas in gateway cities. So in short, we are state foresters that work for a tree planting initiative. Specifically, our program is funded by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and we're administered by the DCR. These are some of our other funding partners. We do get support from the Forest Service, and then these Massachusetts partners help us basically get our program done. So often one of the first questions when I tell people what my job is, what is a gateway city? So these cities, there's 26 of them in our state, and they are mid-sized industrial cities that once offered residents a gateway to the American dream. So that's kind of the origin of the name. So here are some examples of gateway cities: New Bedford, Holyoke, and Haverhill. And so these cities are areas that once had thriving industrial economies when manufacturing jobs were just booming. And you can see we have some, there's this mill district in Holyoke. You might be familiar with the mills in Lowell. So that was all part of this kind of booming manufacturing time. Over the years, manufacturing jobs disappeared as we welcomed more automation in our lives. And with the disappearance of these manufacturing jobs, the workforce declined, which in turn the population declined. So these cities, they really started to face some significant social and financial struggles. You can see Holyoke here. It still has the infrastructure, so this is a mill building, and they were known for making paper. And Holyoke was actually the first planned industrial city in the state, in the country. And so basically it was designed and created with manufacturing in mind. So you can imagine how the collapse of that industry would affect a city like that. So looking a little bit more into gateway cities, so the state uses the following criteria to determine who qualifies for a gateway city. So it's a population size of between 30,000 and 250,000. The median household income is below state average, and as is the educational attainment rate is also going to be below state average. So some more examples of gateway cities. Here's Taunton and then also Chelsea. And then in this Taunton photo, I thought this was a good one because you can specifically see the lack of urban canopy. So we work in gateway cities. We don't work in the entirety of a city. We focus our planting efforts into a planting zone. And the way we determine where those planting zones are through some additional criteria. So low tree canopy. Why would there be a tree planting program where there's already a lot of trees? So of course that makes sense. Areas with older housing stock, higher wind speeds, and environmental justice communities. And these two criteria really go hand in hand because you have like a lot of old apartment buildings in these neighborhoods that are probably poorly insulated, and you're exposed to these high winds. You're gonna have a drafty living situation and require a lot of energy to heat, which of course is money. So these are the areas where we work. So environmental justice communities, we'll look at that a little bit. So this is based on the principle that everyone, all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, national origin, deserve to be protected from environmental hazards and to enjoy the benefits of a healthful environment. So one of the negative impacts of a changing climate, as we're seeing, is heat, rising temperature. So thinking about heat-related illnesses and fatalities. And the EPA actually states that the people that are most likely to be most susceptible to heat-related illness and fatalities are people who are of lower income, who come from communities of color, and who may be immigrant status as well. So that is an example of an environmental injustice. So we are working to address that issue. So this is, excuse me, this is a state map that they produced to show the environmental justice communities in Massachusetts. There are three criteria, and so that's the different colors that you'll see, and then the overlapping of the criterion. So similar to Gateway City criterion, these EJ, environmental justice, also EJ for short, they make 65% or less of the statewide annual median household income. You're going to have minorities making up 40% or more of the populations. And then also there's a language barrier. So 25% or more of the households identify as speaking English as less than very well. So again, this is just kind of showing where these EJ communities are. And if you can kind of keep a visual in your head of this map, as I change the slide, this is more or less how we've laid out our program. So this is our program map. This is the Greening the Gateway Cities project areas, essentially. These are all the cities we're in. Currently, we're in 23 out of the 26 gateway cities. There's a few, Methuen, Peabody, Attleboro, that we haven't started our program in yet. So we started 10 years ago, and we started in 3 cities. So Fall River, Chelsea, and Holyoke were the original cities. So this year is, like I said, the 10 years that we've been planting in those cities. And since then, we've grown, we've started to plant in more cities, and we did finally this last year past 40,000 trees planted since we started. Here is another environmental justice map. So this is also from the state. They produced this. So here's the entirety of Holyoke. I spotlight Holyoke because it's one of the cities I work in. And so again, as I said, we don't plant in the entirety of the city. We are looking for the areas with the most vulnerable populations. And the blue is an overlap of the minority income and the English isolation criteria. So you see where the blue is where we defined our project area. So this is the Holyoke tree planting zone. So my crew and I, we will go into this zone and pretty much plant trees wherever we can, public property, private property. Yeah, so, all right. So that's a little bit about where our program works, Gateway Cities, Environmental Justice Zones. We're gonna transition and kind of talk about a little bit more of the why this work is important. So any presentation about that involves trees and climate change, we'd be remiss if we didn't include mention of the urban heat island effect. So this is basically the reasoning behind why cities are hotter than suburban areas and rural, more agricultural areas. So it's the incredible amount of impervious surface that you find in cities, like just rooftops and parking garages and parking lots and all the streets. And these darker paved surfaces do an incredible job of absorbing heat and then holding on to it. So where during the nighttime in these areas on a super hot day, these cool off quite a bit. But the downtown area on super hot days is going to retain that heat, and so it's going to stay at an overall higher temperature. So the reason this is important is because cities are where most of the population lives, and that trend is only going to increase. So, and as I mentioned previously, heat is a health hazard. You know, heat does kill. You know, there are especially vulnerable populations, elderly, people who already have maybe predisposition to health issues. So this is it's a problem, and it's only going to become more of a problem as the climate continues to change. But this kind of simple little diagram shows that as we plant urban trees, the temperature actually goes down, and that is because of the increase in shade. And this results in pedestrian thermal comfort. So basically, it's more comfortable living, and also it's safer. So this is a thermal image. Sorry, I'm not blocking the screen. This is a thermal image, and this was actually a photo taken in the January 2017 heat wave in Melbourne. So it was super hot, so the cooler areas were hitting 95 degrees. So you see, these are obviously the trees, but these blue areas are the shade that the trees are casting, and that's registering at 95. Again, this is a heat wave. And then you have the impervious surfaces that are way hotter, almost a 50-degree difference, 141 degrees. So this just is a great visual demonstration of how trees can significantly cool the immediate area around them. And I will mention in Australia, there was a period of 18 years recently where they experienced like more than 350 heat-related deaths. So again, heat is a public health crisis, and one of the reasons why we are planting trees. So similar to that last photo, you see the nice shade that this tree is casting. And you see this car strategically parked in that nice shade area. I'm sure many of you have gotten into a hot car on a summer day. It's terrible. So again, just like another little micro example of how effective trees are at cooling. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of look a little bit more into the benefits of trees. I know I've just been talking about cooling so far, but there's a long list of benefits of trees. So in addition to providing shade, trees also, they have evapotranspiration. So as trees photosynthesize, they then transpire, and they're releasing moisture into the air. And the moisture is cooling, essentially. It cools the immediate area. So in those two ways, trees can help lower temperatures. Trees can act as a wind buffer. They can act to basically randomize wind patterns and disrupt and hopefully deter wind away from buildings. As they get mature and start to create a connected canopy, they're definitely effective for dampening sound, especially if you live like near a thruway or something. You're going to want to make sure there's a nice tree break there. Of course, aesthetics, maybe that's the first thing that people think of with trees. They are certainly something that increases property value. You have a lot of mature trees on your property. And trees are incredible at providing biodiversity. And we plant so many different species, and each different species has specific wildlife that they can attract and support. And so these trees are creating food and habitat for wildlife, and so we're talking birds and mammals and insects and all the micro life that we can't really see. Trees do an incredible job with stormwater management and flooding, with climate change, extreme weather events, flooding. These are all on the rise. So stormwater management is a top issue for municipalities. So they do it in two ways. So the canopy of a tree the leaves will literally intercept the rain, before it hits the ground. But then also the incredible root mass and the other, and the pervious surface, the green space essentially of the tree is growing in, will absorb and store stormwater, which is going to prevent or delay at least the water running off onto the impervious surface and flooding. Of course, carbon storage, especially when you have a tree that has reached its mature age and its mature size, you are getting an incredible amount of carbon storage. And so, of course, with climate change, that's something we're very interested in, is basically capturing that CO2 and being able to create more storage for it. So another reason we want to increase urban forests. Trees have a lot of different benefits for mental and physical health in people. And lastly, they benefit the air. I'm sure maybe that's probably like one of the first things I learned about trees was they clean the air. And they do. They can intercept particulate matter and absorb gaseous contaminants. So here we are on Granville Ave in Worcester, Mass. So we're in the center of the state now. And we're talking about these beautiful trees on this municipal right-of-way providing all these benefits. So this is where a case study occurred that we're going to talk about. So this is the Asian longhorn beetle infestation. Has anyone heard of this? All right, yes. So this is 2008, and we have the introduction of the Asian longhorn beetle, also known as ALB. We have a little sample of the insect that Sam's going to pass around. Feel free to take a look. So this is an invasive pest species that comes from Asia, and you can see in these left photos the beetle. It's pretty darn big. And then in this photo you can see the larval form, and the larvae, when the insect is in its larval stage, that's when it's doing all the damage. So this is a wood-boring insect. So it's basically going to be inside the tree. You can see the damage it leaves when it exits the tree. These larvae are inside, and if you've heard of phloem, the vascular, so xylem and phloem, we've got the vascular system, which is on the outside of the tree, basically, the very outer layer before the bark. These insects are just basically disrupting and chomping on all of that whole vascular system, which essentially strangles the tree. So it's very fatal. So unfortunately, ALB just totally came on. It came on heavy, and so many trees became infested. So it targets, its hosts are hardwood trees and I would say like most of the species that got hit were maple trees, but there was also damage with elms and sycamores, birches. So it hit a lot of different tree species. So trees started to die in Worcester. So there was, of course, a local response with the Massachusetts DCR, but then also a federal response as well. And so together, this quarantine zone was defined. And so this is not the entirety of Worcester County, but a lot of it. And based on the infestations of this insect and like certain radius around them, that's how they designated this quarantine zone. and this basically means that any plant material that moves over these boundaries is just heavily regulated. So an attempt to stop the spread. So the response effort was quick, and unfortunately, about 30,000 trees had to be removed. And so you can see these big, beautiful, almost mature trees that are, pumping out benefits for the community. Unfortunately, they're all infested. They may not be necessarily dead yet, but they are going to become essentially a hazard to the urban landscape around them. So they have to be removed. So this is 2009, only a year after the arrival of the invasive insect. And also in 2009, you can see what a dramatic difference it is when these trees are removed. So after this happened, over the next few seasons, people in charge in Worcester began to hear some feedback from residents that, oh my gosh, our utility bills have just skyrocketed. And now with all this new exposure to the sun, they're just experiencing just higher heating and cooling costs. So at this time also, UMass got involved and did some data collection and analysis. And so Ben Weil in particular, he works, he's a UMass Extension assistant professor, and he's one of our collaborating partners. He was able to look at the removal of those 30,000 trees in Worcester County during this ALB infestation, and he found that indeed it did result in an increase in energy use by 40%. So that's the reason that people were experiencing increased utility bills. Not to mention all of this 150 metric tons of CO2. The removal of those trees accounts for that much of a release in the atmosphere. So quickly, this ALB project, the combined national and local response said, whoa, this is a problem, that all of these trees are gone all of a sudden. So the response effort pivoted and transitioned into the ALB reforestation program. So they said, we gotta get trees right back in the ground so we can start recapturing some of these benefits. Now, in particular, they do not plant any tree species that are a host species of ALB. Unfortunately, the outbreak is very well controlled. It's like pretty much gone. It's not like officially eradicated. So we're still just operating out of an abundance of caution. And this photo is just a couple years after the trees were planted. And I don't know if it's apparent, but we're looking at the same street view in all these photos here. So that mature canopy has become this little crop of newly planted trees. And then just earlier last year, this was taken. And you can see they're really starting to mature. This linden is throwing a ton of shade out. And they're starting to approach that point where they can start recapturing some of those benefits that were lost. So that's kind of the inception story of why our program exists. So GGCP is modeled after the ALB reforestation effort. So as I mentioned, we plant basically anywhere within our planting zones, public, private property. We divide it up about, it's kind of variable, but more or less 20% of our tree planting efforts are going to be on public property, with 80% going on private property. And here's just a few examples of different landscapes and environments we'll be planting trees on. On the left, you'll see our crews planting in what could be a housing authority or apartment complex. We planted a lot of multi-family units. This is my crew in downtown Holyoke planting next to a parking garage. So a ton of impervious surface. Really great opportunity to try to break that up with a tree. And then we also plant on single family residences as well. So anywhere that there are people that are willing to accept the tree and most importantly, care for the tree. When we have trained crews that will come in and plant the tree. We also have foresters that will come in before that and make a site plan with the tree recipients. But it is up to the tree recipient to agree to water each tree 20 gallons a week for the first couple of years, so that's crucial. A couple of our goals, we have a rough goal of 2,400 trees to plant in each planting zone, And specifically, this number came from looking at the sizes of our initial cities we were in, Chelsea, Fall River, and Holyoke. And this is the number that once you achieve that number, you actually start to achieve the density that you are looking to get in these planting zones, where you're starting to get some appreciable benefits. You're starting to get some cooling effects and other benefits. We are focusing on large shade trees. It seems that there are a lot of people out there that are really excited to have a small flowering cherry on their front lawn. Nothing against flowering cherries, they're beautiful. They're also not terribly long-lived and are very susceptible to diseases. But my point being, we're trying to plant species in the landscape that are gonna be able to reach maturity and to live long and to create huge canopies. Species diversity is also one of our very important metrics we're always going after, is diversity in tree species. And that's always, you've got a healthy urban forest has a lot of different trees. All right, so we know trees can cool down buildings by the shade they cast. There's a little more to it than that. We have to be strategic about it because we need to think about where your building is in relation to the sun. So here we are in the northern hemisphere. It's most effective to be planting your shade trees to the south and west of a building that you want to cool. This is where you're going to get your strongest sun exposure, especially in the summer when your AC is running a lot. You've got the late afternoon and setting sun on the west side. Great place for your tall, deciduous shade trees. You have to be a little bit more careful planting on the southern side of a property, and that's because during the winter, the sunlight is so crucial in that it provides solar warming, essentially. It's one opportunity to get some free heat. So you wouldn't want anything blocking the sun from your house during the winter. So you would never plant an evergreen on the south side because that's just gonna block it. Or even oak trees. I don't know if anyone's noticed, oaks are really famous for holding on to their leaves. You see oak trees around the campus, they probably still have their leaves, and they will till like February or March. So you wouldn't want to put that on the south side either, because that's going to block that important solar warming. Planting smaller medium trees on the east side for the morning sun, and then also on the north side, we get those north winds in the winter. It's really great to have a nice windbreak of evergreens. So they should be planted about a tree height's distance away from the house, but they can be really effective at diverting the wind. So these are just some principles that we're keeping in mind when we're siting trees and trying to help achieve our energy reduction goals. All right. So we kind of a tangential way that that our program works to promote sustainability is by maintaining some research collaborations. So we have worked with UMass and Clark University. Specifically, Clark has a program called the Human Environment Regional Observatory, and they go by HERO. So I've been working with this program since 2017, and the HERO students, so undergrads, have been active collecting a lot of data in our planting zones. So they're following up on us. And so I mentioned UMass had a response in the initial ALB infestation, and the HERO students were also integral in helping with that initial analysis. After ALB, our program started, and Ben Weil and his UMass team came over to our tree planting zones and had started a temperature study. So we basically have these small little temperature sensors that are hanging on a street sign or a downspout throughout our planting zone and outside of the planting zone, serving as a control. And this is just a real-time research project that's answering the question, is the tree planting we're doing, is that having an effect? Is it affecting the temperatures? And the answer is so far yes. I mean, it's only been 10 years, but observationally, temperatures are reducing in the areas where we're planting trees. The HERO program also has and continues to conduct a tree survivability project. So they basically get our data and a list of the trees that we've planted, and they go to those trees and follow up on them, X number of years later. and they ask, is the tree alive? Is it still there? Sometimes they're not, they get cut down. And is it in, what kind of condition is it in? And this kind of information is really important to us because we need, it's accountability for us. We need to make sure we're doing the right thing, we're planting the right species. So it's almost nice to have this kind of like internal audit being performed, giving us this kind of feedback and response. And the good news is that at least on the initial gateway cities, Holyoke, Chelsea, Fall River, tree survivability was good. I think in particular, Holyoke was in the high 80s or 90 percentile of survivability, which is good. They also conducted a lot of interviews with tree recipients. So as I mentioned, if you're a homeowner or a resident, you have to own the home, and you get a tree on your property, you're agreeing to maintain the tree for an establishment period, which is 2 years after being planted. And so because it's up to the person, to maintain the tree, there's a really important social dynamic between tree recipients and tree survivability. A tree's success is only going to be as good as the care it gets. We do our best to plant the tree, but really it's up to people after that. So getting to interview these people, the people who receive trees, the HERO program has just given us new insight, basically into, maybe like motivation, why people got a tree in the first place. Were they interested in aesthetics, or was it the cooling, and how well did their tree survive? There's all kinds of interesting connections that can be made there. All right, so I'm gonna hand things over to Sam.
Take that from you. All right, thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Samantha. And can everyone hear me okay? All right, sorry, I know I have a small voice. All right, so for this next part, I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper about the different sustainable and resilient practices that our program implements, and also look at it from a statewide perspective as well. So starting off and kind of tying this into what Sarah was just presenting on, before you start thinking about sustainability and resiliency, it's really important to know your purpose of your program and why you're doing what you're doing. So in our case, we're thinking, okay, what's the goal? Why do we even want to plant urban trees? And as Sarah had mentioned, we're a DCR state agency, so we're funded by taxpayer dollars to serve the communities that we're working in. So we're trying to enhance that well-being so that they're able to have the environmental, social, and economic benefits that cities that have high urban canopy are already experiencing. So then thinking about this in a sustainable way and asking ourselves, what does sustainability even mean? And why is it important to implement sustainable practices into our operations? And so ultimately, sustainability is defined as how current generations can meet their needs without compromising the needs of future generations. And so I think the first place that you want to start off with that is education and advocacy. Once you get people on board and they realize how important it is to have an urban forest, why does that keep happening? Once they realize how important it is to have a tree planted at their property, and that tree gets planted, then they're going to be benefiting those future generations because they're going to reap those benefits sooner than someone who's going to take longer to be convinced of why trees are important. The next sustainable practice would be right tree, right place. We're coming into these new spaces that have no trees. We want to make sure that where we're planting a tree today is still going to be as beneficial and useful as a tree that's there in 30 years. And lastly, maintenance and stewardship. Sorry, maybe that's better. Structural pruning is one of the best things you can do for a young tree, just to make sure that when it's maturing and it's growing, it's structurally sound. So it has that main central leader, you're taking off any crossing or broken branches, and just making sure that that tree is very intact and is going to be very sturdy. And then in terms of resiliency, so this is the ability to prepare for, recover from, and adapt to future threats and disruptive events. So through our lens, we're kind of thinking about changing weather patterns. So that's in terms of drought, flooding, heat waves. We're also noticing a lot of pests and diseases, as we were just talking about with ALB. And so some of our best defenses to maintain a resilient forest is to be really mindful of our species selection and also have a very diverse species palette when we're planting. So going back to one of our first sustainable practices, right tree, right place. This is a tree planting standards diagram that we're currently working on. And this is something that we're going to be giving to all our foresters so that we kind of standardize our tree siting process. So I know there's a lot of information here, I'm not going to really go through all of it. But some of the things we want to think about are where are the stop signs in the intersections when we're planting trees. We're recommending, planting at least 30, 40 feet away so that when those trees mature and cars are rolling up, that they're able to see those stop signs and make sure that there's public safety there. Taking into consideration if there's overhead wires, making sure we're ADA compliant. So ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's requiring a 4-foot wide sidewalk so that people with wheelchairs are able to access the sidewalk with any obstructions. And so when we are coming in and putting in new tree pits, we want to make sure that we're able to maintain that 4-foot width behind it so that in the future that those sidewalks are still usable. All right, and these are just some everyday pictures that we see. I don't know, we could open up. Does anyone see anything about these pictures that's maybe a red flag or something that actually looks good? You can go ahead and shout it out. Yep.
Just the one right in front of the stop sign.
Right, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be planting an oak 1 foot away from a stop sign, yeah. Anyone else? No? That's all right. Yeah, stop sign, that's a huge obvious one. You would think that you wouldn't do that, but they did. The second picture over here, this was taken when I was on a site visit in Westfield, and they wanted to continue this tree planting line right here. And unfortunately, I had to say no, because these red lines right here, those are underground electric lines. And does anyone have any guesses why we don't want to plant on top of electric lines? Yep.
Roots could interfere with the line.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. Roots could interfere with the lines. Also, if in the future, if a utility company needs to come in and do any maintenance, they'll usually come in with an excavator and damage the roots. And that's just going to cause a tree to fail in the future. So that's something we're really mindful for. We want to make sure that we're planting trees in spaces that are going to survive. And this last picture back here, this is a good picture. This is one of my plantings. And the main thing I wanted to point out is, so the city of Holyoke, where Sarah works, they built these really big tree belts for us. They're probably about 6 feet wide, which is amazing for large trees. But the other thing I wanted to point out is how many AC units we have. So we have 4 AC units in there. Most of them have their blinds drawn, and you can see the shade that this tree is already starting to produce. So once it becomes larger, hopefully, that's going to give them the benefits that our program's trying to implement. All right, this next slide, this is just showing our tree planting list, or our species list, sorry. And so you can see that we have a wide variety of species that we can choose from when we're going out and doing site visits. We also break this up into 3 different categories. So up top here we have our preferred urban canopy trees. And these are the trees that are going to get larger, which means they're usually going to live longer and produce more of those benefits that we're trying to give our residents. Secondary consideration over here, these are more of our medium canopy trees. And then over here we have used sparingly, and these are our more smaller underwire trees and also our flowering trees. It's just funny because everyone always just wants a cherry, but they don't live as long, and they get all these pests and diseases. So we try to sway people to one of the other categories. Oops, is that the next slide? All right, and so then to kind of open this up and broaden it to how the state is thinking about this as a whole, in 2023, Massachusetts came out with the Resilient Mass Plan, and this is a state hazard mitigation and climate adaptation plan. So pretty much what they did was they reached out to different stakeholders and state agencies, and they were identifying the different strategies and actions that our agencies can take to become more resilient. So here's a QR code if anyone's interested in the executive summary. And since Greening the Gateway Cities is a DCR state-funded project or program, we do have a role, and we are mentioned in the plan. And they were saying the action we could take to best help Massachusetts become resilient is to expand into those additional environmental justice communities that Sarah had mentioned earlier. All right, so that was a lot of talking about how trees can help us become more resilient against climate change, but it didn't feel right to glaze over the fact that climate change still does have an effect on our trees. And the main way that trees are affected is they get all these environmental stressors from these harsher weather events that are happening lately. So the heat waves with longer consecutive high heat days, heavy rain events and flooding. This picture up top here was taken a few weeks ago in Boston when the harbor flooded. Sarah and I were trying to figure out which trees these were, and there's a good chance they could be maples, which do not like salt in the harbor's salt water. So if that's the case, then those trees are going to have a really hard time recovering. Another thing to think about is prolonged periods of drought. In 2022, just thinking back to that planting season, we had a statewide severe drought warning. So no one could use their hoses, water was super limited, and so we couldn't even have a fall planting season that year, which was pretty detrimental for our numbers. So just thinking about how those heat stressors, or how those events really stress out our trees. And then also on top of that, thinking about pests and diseases. So when trees are stressed, they're a lot more susceptible to different pests and diseases, kind of similar to like our immune systems, right? If you're healthy, you're more likely to fight off illnesses. If you're not, you become a bit more susceptible. Another thing with pests is we're having more mild winters. And so we're not having as many of those cold snaps that are killing off those pests. So they're able to make it through the winter in larger populations, and they're also able to have an additional reproductive cycle. So that's a little alarming. So if anyone's interested in learning more about pests and diseases and forest health, I definitely recommend looking into the Massachusetts DCR Forest Health Story Map. It's really interactive and has a lot of good information on there. All right, and this is one of our last slides. But so we also wanted to show that the plant hardiness zone map was updated in 2023. And it's really interesting the difference in what the zones were in 2012 versus 2023. So you can see the Berkshires. We used to have some 5A up there, but that's gone. Just a lot of the warmer zones are now moving upward. And from an urban forester's lens, what that says to us is we need to start thinking about species migration and looking at our species list and thinking, okay, which trees are going to be able to withstand these hotter climates, and which trees are we going to have to take off the list. So the first one that comes to mind for me are white pines. I don't know if anyone's gone to Maine. I'm sure so many of you have, but white pines are thriving up there. But you're going to start noticing that they're dwindling below Maine, and so I'm a little nervous to see how that trend keeps progressing. Sarah, do you want to talk about sugar maple?
I live in East Hampton, and in my community there are one of the most popular trees on the tree belt, so that's the strip of green between the road and the sidewalk, are sugar maples. And there are these incredible, mature, beautiful sugar maples. And unfortunately, sugar maples have a really hard time with the heat spikes. So our really hot summers are starting to really adversely affect sugar maple populations. So we're very careful now about where we're siting sugar maples on the side of a street. Definitely no longer doing that. So you can kind of just see that there's some change happening in different species populations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so we know that was a lot of doom and gloom, and we don't want to leave you all on a bad note. So if anyone's interested or motivated in thinking what you can do to help, we came up with a list of some pretty easy things that you can do to kind of help with the tree initiative. So number one, being an advocate, reaching out to your local tree warden or community tree board and just showing interest in having trees planted in the community. You can request a city tree. They're free. You just reach out, look on your city's website and see how you can request that. If you're lucky enough to own a property, we strongly encourage you to plant a tree. Lawns usually provide a lot more growing space for trees to thrive, and they're not dealing with as harsh of urban conditions as our street trees. So that's an easy thing you can do. And lastly, if you're someone who doesn't own property, maybe you're a renter, you can always look up volunteer planting events. It's always a really feel-good thing. You meet a lot of people who are out there doing that too. You can also enroll in pruning workshops. If anyone's ever near UMass, Dave Bologniers is always putting those on. And also just helping to water and mulch your trees, you know, just showing them a little love and support. It really goes a long way. All right, so with that, we wanted to say thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We hope you got something out of it. Here's our contact information if anyone wants to follow up, has any questions. We've also linked our website here, MA Urban Canopy, if you want to check that out. And yeah, I guess we're open for questions if anyone has any. Yeah?
Could you define impervious surface?
Pervious or impervious?
Whichever.
Sure, sorry, great question. Probably should have explained that. So impervious surface is like concrete or this desk. Rainwater is not going to get through and reach the ground, the soil. And that's like in a city, you've got tons of impervious surface. Pervious is also permeable, is going to let that water through that material so it can reach the roots.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Will the white pine or the maple survive better at altitude? So, you know, as it climbs up to the mountains here, or is it going to be wiped out?
Well, I mean, I don't want to give the impression that neither are going to be wiped out anytime soon. You know, it's kind of just like the general trajectory. But it really depends on, for both those populations, like the heat spikes. It is generally cooler in the mountains, so I think probably communities are going to be doing better up there. But again, if you're still having those periodic heat waves, they're still going to be susceptible to stress. Mm-hmm. So odds are yes, but you know, within reason.
Yep.
Where are the trees that you're planting sourced from? Is it different for different areas, or is it the same for them?
That's a really good question. I could take that. So right now we are sourcing our trees from 2 different nurseries. Both of them are in Massachusetts, and there is a lot of research that says that it's good to procure your trees closely to where you're planting them because they're used to the conditions. So one of our nurseries is Amherst. It's Amherst Tree Nurseries, so over here on the western side of the state. And our other nursery is called Bigelow Nurseries. And where are they at? Are they?
Dedham, I believe.
Dedham, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, in the Boston area.
Yep. Yeah, so both Massachusetts local nurseries. Yeah.
And I'll just maybe add a little bit on that, which is that they do grow a lot of their trees at their nurseries. However, they do also import trees. So we do, every now and then we'll get trees and we are uncovering the root ball and it's bright red soil, not from Massachusetts. So we do get some non-native soils, and that's kind of part of urban forestry is, I mean, you don't really have much of a native landscape in a city regardless. So bringing those non-native soils is just kind of part of that urban profile.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of impervious surfaces, as you mentioned, in cities, and there's a lot of vacant industrial sites and shopping malls with lots of paved area. Is there any consideration or thought about taking those parking lots and, you know, people paved paradise made parking lot, reversing that process and making soils and planting trees in these wastelands?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are probably more incentives than I'm aware of. I know specifically within our program, we've recently launched a grant program. So we are offering, it's a reimbursement grant. So basically municipalities can apply, and this is to essentially create more plantable spaces. So to dig up the impervious. So we're busting through concrete and we're remediating the soil to create a more hospitable environment for trees. So we are trying to, that's just kind of one small way we're trying to get some of the impervious. On a larger scale, like you're saying, like, you know, big parking lots, you know, I'm sure there's state and even more local initiatives to do that, but our program, we're kind of starting on more of like a tree belt, tree pit way. But I agree, I mean, those are, especially if you're thinking of stormwater management, you know, you've got to break that up. Yeah, that can be very problematic.
Mm-hmm. And we did do one in Westfield. They actually did work on a project with us where they were constructing a parking lot, and that's exactly what they did. They opened up all these tree wells, and we were able to plant about 25 trees in there, which is great. So, yes. Yep.
I actually live in Westfield, and I was wondering if there was any sort of, I know that there's there's the option to get a free street tree with your city. Is there any sort of price tag attached to lawn planted trees, or like an estimate?
Yeah, so a couple different things. So within the city, I think in general, they're always promoting trying to get a tree planted in front of your house. If you're living in the planting zone in Westfield, which is just a portion of the city, there's, you know, you can get basically unlimited trees planted on your property within reason. You know, we think about the mature size and how big your property is. So there's no cost. It's essentially the cost of your water bill to water the trees. And I know for the city, there's no costs as well, except for the maintenance. But a price tag, gosh, I wonder what our recent price tag is on a tree. You know, you consider the cost of a tree, the labor. You know, a tree is, you know, most of our trees are like $500, say, and you know, you'd be looking at around $1,000, I would say, for tree planting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm gonna cut us off there for tonight. If you have more questions, I invite you to come down. Samantha and Sarah have some information up front. You can grab another question, but let's thank them for coming in tonight.